here, first and foremost, I would like to express that the support that we've gotten through really the community, and I mean the community everywhere. I met with Governor Nixon yesterday. I received a phone call from Senator Blunt. I received a contact from Claire McCaskill's office, Senator McCaskill, Congressman Ann Wagner, Congressman Emanuel Cleaver, Archbishop Carlson, several, Steve Sanger, our county executive. It's really a big deal. I just met with the NAACP or got off the phone with them. Their number one priority is, they said, I thought they'd say actually, Chief, here's our questions. Here's what we have. Chief, how's your officers? Isn't that outstanding? So I do appreciate that. It's a big deal. These officers are at home right now. They're resting with their families and their friends. I called one of the officers today. He didn't pick up. I'm hopeful that he's resting right now with his family. I haven't had the opportunity to talk to the Webster Groves officer at this point. I'm sure he's doing okay, though. We have a situation right now to where we have a active investigation. I said yesterday that that investigation is our number one priority on the police department. You know what? It's critical. But really the number one priority on the police department right now is to make sure that we continue a tempo of service and protection and relationships in the Ferguson area to make sure that we don't have a regression of everything that we have been able to accomplish since last fall. And I truly believe that. That's probably one of the more remarkable things that has ever happened in law enforcement in St. Louis County. I would argue perhaps in the nation, and I don't feel like that we can afford to go back. So because of that, one of the things that I did was I met with the mayor of Ferguson yesterday. I met with the County Executive Stanger. And I said, and I also met with the governor yesterday, and I spoke to him about this. And I said, I feel like it's probably in everybody's best interest that the St. Louis County Police Department, along with the Highway Patrol, take over the security function, again, of the city of Ferguson. And I feel like that's the right thing to do because it's fair. We understand that we're not a burden on other law enforcement in the area, but we want to make sure that we have a level of expectation in our community that they're going to be safe, and in our protest community that they understand exactly what the rules are there. So that is really the number one priority regarding this. You saw on TV last night that we, yesterday afternoon, we looked at a house in the Ferguson area on a suspect search. Please appreciate the fact that we have a situation where many leads come into us. There was several leads that came into us regarding that specific house. We were able to investigate that. I don't feel like at this point that's going to lead us anywhere regarding this investigation. I would tell you that I appreciated the cooperation and the forthrightness that we got from the individuals that were in that house at the time. We've had several leads since then. I cannot tell you at this point that an arrest is imminent. There's certainly nobody in custody. And when we get to the point to where we feel like that we have active leads, if we can do anything through you to have the community assist us, we'll certainly let you know. The amount of donations toward a reward are absolutely pouring in. In fact, that was one of the reasons that I talked to Congressman Cleaver, because he's out there making sure that where can I send donations coming in toward this reward. I pointed them toward Crime Stoppers. But those things are remarkable. They really are. And I'm thankful, again, that we don't have a situation to where we're looking on an investigation regarding a homicide and that these officers will recover, but yet it does express the support that the community has. And please understand the amount of folks that are involved in expressing their First Amendment rights who have contacted me and said, hey, listen, what happened to those officers was wrong. And we certainly support the police department and law enforcement, because if we don't have you, then we have no sense of security and we have no ability to do what we're doing. So that's critical, and I certainly appreciate that. The detectives are looking at this investigation around the clock. They will not rest until we get to the point of where we have a conclusion regarding this investigation. As you know, there is substantial award money out there right now, and that's something that we hope can further the investigation. I would certainly hope that that would happen. And I'd like to take any questions that you guys have. Ma'am.
Hi, my name is Denise Reese from News Agency Roughly. My question is, the three persons you interrogated yesterday, what leads to what kind of factors were responsible for you interrogating them?
Yeah, so we interviewed them is what we did. And without going into a whole lot on that, because again, I appreciate their cooperation and I wouldn't want to do anything to compromise them. But as you might imagine, there's all sorts of information that comes in regarding an investigation, especially of this magnitude. And when that happens, then we have the obligation to follow up on those statements made to us, on those clues, on those facts and circumstances that would lead different people, perhaps in two different areas, to say, hey, I saw this. I don't know what this necessarily means, but people speculate on different things. It leads law enforcement to it. And I would tell you that that was a whole lot more, without getting into a whole lot of details that I think are very inappropriate to share with anybody else at this time, since these leads are going away, that we felt like that at that point in time that was a very good path for us to take as far as the investigation. You also have to understand with leads, if you don't have the ability to take a look at those things and ask those questions and talk to those folks and solicit that they're helping us with that, then we never understand if we've done everything on that investigation than we possibly can. So I hope you appreciate that, but you really have to make sure that you never have to go back and look at leads again, I think is what I'm trying to tell you, and I appreciate that. You see the officers on top of the roof, looking in that vent. They would have preferred not to do that, but when they got up in the attic, there was not a way for them to get back to a certain point. So those things happen, and they probably look extraordinary to other people, but those are part of what we do. Sir?
Can you share any lessons learned from the shell casing recovery?
I can't share any evidence regarding any detail of any information regarding any evidence we may or may not have.
So no gun, you can't identify the gun?
Ma'am?
It's been more than 1 day now since the officers were shot. I mean, is there a critical point after which it becomes more challenging to find the suspect?
Yes, but we're not there yet. We really aren't. It's hard to figure out exactly if it's 1 day or 2 days or 1 week or whatever it is beyond that. It's really when you begin to get the absence of credible information that is coming forward in an investigation to where you kind of need to stop, regroup, and figure out where you are. We're not at that point yet, however. So I still think we have the ability. In fact, we are having the ability to still track down certain leads. And again, even if they're not positive leads, at least we know we're not going to go in that direction any further.
Chief, is it suspect or suspects? Do you have any restrictions and suspects?
It's a good question. We don't know yet. So I can't say with any sort of conviction on whether I have a 9mm or a 22 or a 40 caliber or a 45 or whatever at this point. Those are things that the detectives are taking a look at. Those are things that might make a difference in the investigation, but we're going to kind of go from there and see. Sir?
Chief, we didn't see many officers in riot here last night. Was that a calculated risk? Can you talk about your strategy there?
I would tell you that probably there's a whole lot of calculated risk in law enforcement, no matter what we're doing. But yes, we're trying to obviously always portray the best possible image and stance that we can. But it's a very important responsibility of the police chief to make sure that my officers know that they have the equipment they have to keep themselves safe. And I would tell you that absence the riot gear and different things like that, I think it would be a very good question for one of our officers to say, hey, what does it feel like tonight, 24 hours after a shooting or so, to be in a position to where here I am standing on the street and I don't have a lot of cover, it's dark, I can't really see what's going to happen. So I commend those brave men and women who are out there doing that. But we didn't have a riot last night either. So, from time to time, that riot equipment is not necessarily ballistic equipment, it's riot equipment. So, at times that equipment we have it for certain different reasons.
What are they telling you about what it's like to stand out there that night
You know, that's interesting because I went up with Deputy Chief Cox and some other commanders last night to the command post, and I visited with my officers because I want to make sure they have smiles on their faces, not frowns on their faces. And I want to really kind of take a pulse of what their attitude is out there, and you know, how do I expect them to perform that evening. And I found that the officers, both from the Missouri State Highway Patrol and the St. Louis County officers, they were doing fine emotionally. They were good to go. There wasn't a sentiment of anger or frustration or anything like that. These guys understand that they're going to move forward and do their jobs. So, and you know, I'll be back up there tonight talking with my officers, making sure that they're okay and they're where they need to be mentally. And I assure you, they are squared away. It's a situation to where we've been through a whole lot since August. So these officers are salty and experienced when it comes to that.
Chief, is there any indication that the suspect or suspects were tied in a protest group or kept getting in protests or had anything to do with this?
I honestly couldn't tell you for sure at this point. I mean, we really don't know that. So it's kind of really hard to speculate what kind of nexus there may or may not have existed regarding the shooters and any individuals who would have been out there, you know, for whatever reason. So it's very difficult to know that. I wouldn't be able to say for sure at this point, no, I know these people didn't do it because I don't know who did it at this point. So it doesn't seem to be a coincidence that it happened there. That's interesting. I mean, that's one thing. But beyond that, it's very hard to speculate at this point. I got one over here. Go ahead.
Based on the investigation so far, do you have a better sense of where the shots came from? And do you have any images of the shooter from surveillance video or protester video or anything like that?
Yeah, you know, we poured through our images last night before the day watch detectives went home, who actually had arrived about midnight, you know. But they wanted to make sure that they had those things looked at. I can only tell you at this point, without prejudice and investigation, that we have reviewed all of those things, and we are certainly looking at them to find out if there's anything that would give us any sort of an indication on who might be responsible for this.
The location of the shooter?
Yeah, we have a pretty good idea, maybe, on this, but I mean, I've even talked to community leaders as recently as the last couple hours that have been down there and saying, you know, what's your thoughts on this and different things. So I think we have a pretty good idea on the investigation. I'm not going to pinpoint that area, but I think we have a pretty good general idea of where we think the shots came from.
Chief, without portraying any of the evidence you've looked at so far, can you explain how you're thinking about the shooting has evolved and who, how, whether it was locals, people who may have just been in town, who may be gone now? I mean, just how your thinking has evolved now, 24 hours, but however long it is.
Yeah, I think that I'm not sure necessarily I have enough information to have evolved my thinking as far as I wish I would have. One of the things we need to be careful not to do is make conclusions, because when we do that, we build conclusion upon conclusion upon conclusion, and we eventually convince ourselves that, well, that must be fact, because if we want to accept these five conclusions, well, that'll take you down the wrong road. So we got to be very careful about that. So we're really pretty open-ended on it, on where it would go. I can't necessarily speak to everything regarding what may or may not have been the motivation or who might not have been responsible for that.
Is there anyone the public can help?
Yeah, I mean, I really think there is. I started this off by talking about the outpouring of support with across the spectrum. And I think one way the community can help is that we can make sure that we talk about things that have happened in the community. Please understand these police officers that are out there represent all of us. That's exactly what they do. And it's very difficult to enjoy the freedoms we have at times without their protection. So I think one way that we can ask the community to help, if you hear things, if you can call Crime Stoppers, if you can call the St. Louis County Police Department, those would be things that would be very instrumental in this. As I've stated earlier, these awards that are out there, that's a big deal for us. Ma'am.
Can you speak at all to the perceived skill level of the suspects? I mean, from a distance like that, it was 3 shots, 2 hits. That seems pretty lucky.
It might be lucky, to tell you the truth. You know, we had a lot of gunfire, unfortunately, in August, and there was some in November too, and we didn't have anybody struck on that. Well, there were people struck, but there weren't police officers struck on that. So I don't think but I wouldn't characterize this as a miracle shot by any stretch of the imagination. The bottom line is there were many officers standing together, even if it is a long way off. If we want to believe there were, at least 3 shots fired, then 2 of them did strike, but 1 missed. So, you take a look at anything beyond a certain yardage with a handgun, you go, well, that's a little bit harder to hit, but it can happen, and in fact, it did happen. I don't necessarily ascribe to the fact that this has to be a marksman somewhere with a scope. It may turn out to be, but I don't think that would have had to have been necessary in this case. Ma'am?
So why do you think protest last night remained so peaceful? I don't know what your guys may have been expecting after what happened the night before, but what do you attribute to the peacefulness that we saw last night?
Well, by and large, we wouldn't be here talking today if we didn't have the officer-involved shootings 2 nights ago. So really, even 2 nights ago, while I think parts of it were agitated, for the most part, that wasn't really all that remarkable. And I wasn't surprised to see last night having the tenor that it had. I just don't think that was too remarkable. I was certainly, I would have been disappointed if last night would have looked a lot different and been violent. I think that's what I would say regarding that. However, I also think it's very important that we have the ability from law enforcement to make sure that we're doing everything we can to put veteran guys down there who have seen this already. For example, my watch commander, the lieutenant that's down there, to make sure that they understand what they're looking at so we don't have any sort of level of overreaction. But it's not only law enforcement that can trigger a bad instance. There's folks that show up from time to time that perhaps do not share the same values and mission as some of our other protesters do. So we need to understand that.
Will you start?
Right here, Mike.
You mentioned the donations for the reward. What's the figure of it?
So the figure is beyond $10,000 right now that is out there. Crime Stoppers actually posted a $10,000 reward for this, and there is additional monies that have been coming in beyond that. So we're going to have to figure out at some point in the investigation if we want to raise that, as a matter of fact, to see if that will cause us some assistance in the investigation.
How many tips have you gotten in, and what kind of things do you want people to call you about?
Well, we've received scores of tips, is probably the better way to put it. So, more than a couple dozen. Some of those are we were able to juxtapose with the fact that we thought, okay, these are tips that seem to make sense and different things like that. But we really have to follow up on all of them. We haven't just been inundated with tips compared to some of the other investigations that I've looked at, because there aren't a lot of people, I think, that really saw, at least at this point, that we've been able to identify exactly what happened, and we're just trying to put a name to a face.
So if somebody saw something, or should they be keeping an eye out for something else in the meantime?
Yeah, a lot of tips are based on circumstance. We know there was a shooting, then we saw this happen. We thought that was remarkable because of the proximity or different things like that. So then you have to have the ability to put that together with the investigation and follow that lead up. So we have received a lot of cooperation on this case, but it's not to the point to where we've just, we're having to convene a task force just to handle tips. It's not like that. Sir?
How you doing, Chief?
I'm well.
Thank you. The night of the shooting, there were many skirmishes within the protesters, and from that distance, is it possible at all that someone was firing into the crowd and simply missed from 125 yards, missed the crowd and struck the officers who would have been standing in front of them?
Yeah, you know what? That is possible. Yeah, but it's hard to say. That again, that goes into that speculation on that. The officers were standing shoulder to shoulder, I believe, when they were struck, so they were right there together. Of course, 2 bullets fired in rapid succession have to go somewhere, and if they're fired close enough together, they're probably going to go somewhere near the other one. So it's hard to say. But keep in mind, we had 5 people shot in August in the first 11 days in the protest corridor. And I would argue that probably most of those 5 people shot were just like my officers. They were just kind of in the way. But regardless of whether we have 2 police officers or whether or not we have folks in the crowd, it's a tragedy either way because it undermines everything that everybody's trying to do in this. It really does. Now, I won't walk away from the fact that it is not beyond the realm of possibility that having all those officers standing there together and the fact that 2 of those officers were hit, that these officers weren't targeted. I mean, there's no reason not to discount that at this point. Unfortunately, and there has been, a little bit of, well, in many cases, a whole lot of criticism pointed toward the law enforcement.
All right, not exactly sure why this feed stopped, but I do see an image coming in on another satellite from John McCain, it looks like. So let's tune in and see if this is some new sound.
Just on what point of what we would do differently. One question I asked was if we're not implementing the Choice Act, if we can't.
All right, this seems to be the same press conference that we brought you earlier. And it looks like the Ferguson update has returned, so let me switch on over back to that.
Mandate that people stay in a certain place for a certain length of time. But yes, we've taken measures to make sure that these type of things are at least mitigated in the future. I'll take a new one, yes.
Chief, has there been any talk of St. Louis County Police assuming a leadership role for a longer period in Ferguson? Second part of this question is there any frustration with St. Louis County Police that you all are being called to come fix a problem after it's broken and that you should be involved with things before the situations get out of hand?
I think the last part of that question is one of the things that have been on the mind of myself and the command staff and the county executive and folks like that, because we have learned that we want to make sure that if this is going to be an issue that devolves, that we have that is not going forward, that we want to make sure that if we're going to be responsible because of the manpower issue that we provide to Ferguson, that we have some ability to kind of control that. I think that if we didn't do that, that would probably certainly be questioned. So we're attentive to that to make sure that we do that thing. As far as long-term goals with the Ferguson Police Department, the St. Louis County Police Department stands ready to assist any members of the community to make sure that we don't have a vacuum of law enforcement in those communities. So when we talk about, okay, exactly what is going to happen down the road, there's a lot of moving parts in that right now, and it would be very difficult at this time to speculate on what that may or may not be. But please keep in mind, I think anybody understands that we've demonstrated a tremendous amount of support, certainly to the city of Ferguson at this point.
And has there been any discussions with the governor, with the Attorney General, with the Department of Justice, with Ferguson officials about the role going forward with, and you say you stand ready to serve. Has there been anybody who's actively spoken with you about serving?
Yeah, we haven't gotten into actual discussions regarding what a contract would look like or anything like that for full police services, but we have discussed with city officials, with the Department of Justice, with different entities like that on what would it exactly look like should we go into the city of Ferguson and take over full police services. But we've not gotten that to the point of anything beyond just asserting if that's a possibility, do we want to discuss that any further at this point. Keep in mind the county police department does about $20 million of contracts every year with 74 of our municipalities, ranging from a full service all the way down to records keeping contracts. So we understand how to do these things, but I think you would probably find it unreasonable if my answer to that would have been no. We have to be looking at these different things. But we also have to understand that the Department of Justice and Ferguson are in a consent decree now, or at least working toward that. So it's going to be a three-way conversation regardless of how it may materialize in the future.
And you all are part of that conversation?
We're going to have to be, yes.
Chief, just a So now, instead of St. Louis County Police. Thank you. Just in that protest area, is that going to be the whole city? Is it going to temporarily?
Nah, we're just doing security just for anything that might erupt regarding protest or civil unrest. And actually, it would probably be better for me to clarify that, civil disobedience that would stop the protest. I don't think that we want to make sure that we understand that if we don't have problems, that means there's not problems. So this isn't about patrolling the city of Ferguson. This is simply about making sure that we can provide that security element.
Can we do 2 more questions, please?
Chief Lamar,
Ma'am?
referring to the shooting of the teen officer, you used the word tragedy, but we never knew further to that when we spoke about Michael Brown being shot and young citizen of the same, as you said, same city and same location. Why isn't there the same consternation?
I think you might be wrong, but if you look at a news interview on the 13th day of August, on the back steps here, I expressed my condolences to Mrs. McSpadden and spoke about the tragedy of losing a young life. Any loss of life is tragic. So I don't think that's a fair characterization of where we really are on this.
Anything more you can tell us about the officers? I know you weren't able to reach them recently, but have you spoken to them at all? Do we know when they'll return to work? We understand their injuries aren't life-threatening, but anything more you can tell us about?
Yeah, I appreciate the question on their behalf. I really do. So I would hope they're going to have a full recovery, and I think physically, I think they're working toward that. So I thought mentally both officers were pretty good yesterday when I spoke to them at the hospital, which was really kind of remarkable. And you go back and forth because you're in that emergency room environment, you've just been shot, different things like that. But I thought the officers were doing remarkably well. And again, I'll rephrase what I talked about yesterday. We're maybe less than an inch away from a tragedy with both of these officers. Anytime we're shot here and it stops somewhere behind our ear, and then we have a bullet hole in our shoulder out our back. I wouldn't want to roll those dice if it were me. So I am grateful for the fact that I think these officers are going to be able to fully recover. I'm proud of both of them. There's a family element involved in this, though, too. Our family members and our loved ones and our friends, they suffer with this too. No different than any sort of a tragedy out there. No, you can't. So they're not involved in any sort of an issue. So I would prefer at this point to protect their names, sir.
And so one more personnel question. With St. Louis County Police and the state authorities, is there any preference to not have any other municipalities out there with you?
No, it wasn't like that at all. So, but what happens is the Code 1000 aspect of this, where something happens, and that's just a term we use in our emergency orders countywide, basically says, okay, I have a problem. I'm a watch commander in a precinct or in a city, and I need 25 cars right now. Well, that's a reaction, not a plan. And I feel like that doing it this way, we have a plan going in, and we know what happens. We can brief our officers before they get there. We don't have issues of officers traveling through different jurisdictions trying to get there, not knowing, for example, what they are going to encounter. So it's just a much easier way to do it. There is nothing more important than our municipal partners here in St. Louis County. They know that because they hear that from me all the time. But I need to have those folks out there standing ready should there be issues anywhere else, regardless of what that issue may or may not be.
It has that Code 1000 system. Do you feel in any way that it's become overused and that municipalities are able to use it for ways that's not intended and St. Louis County bears a
I think only in the city of Ferguson. I'm not going to say it was misused. I would just tell you that was their only remedy based on the manpower that was available at the time. And please understand, a lot of this is really uncharted. These are extraordinary events. So I think that Ferguson was still trying to get to the point to where, okay, how do I address this? How can we? What kind of manpower can we get there? But I think it's incumbent upon myself to make sure that we slow this down, we get a plan in place, and we do it the right way so everybody understands what's going on. I'll do one more question if you have any.
I've got one more.
There you go.
The Code 1000 system, has there been talk about reforming that and high-level discussions about what that Code 1000 is going to be used for going forward, and if Ferguson, if that's their only option, are there other small municipalities where that's their emergency button, and maybe that's not the most, maybe it's not used the way it's supposed to be anymore. Maybe they're too reliant on it. Does it show a weakness or a unpreparedness with some of these municipalities that's an option?
No, I don't really think, I wouldn't say that we need to offer an indictment on the Code 1000 system. I would tell you there's been more Code 1000s called, for example, in the city of Ferguson that you would normally see over a 3 or 4 or 5 year span countywide anywhere. But these are remarkable events that some folks aren't necessarily used to seeing. So I'm not sure we really need to redraft anything necessarily for that. We're always looking at that operation plan to make sure that it's the best it can be. Please understand that's an operational plan with about 62 jurisdictions within St. Louis County. So that's a challenge in and of itself to make sure that we do that the right way. Ladies and gentlemen, I really appreciate your time and interest. Thank you.
All right, guys, that is an update from St. Louis County Police Chief.